When you produce a sound in a regular room, it echoes. That's just how physics works. Most individuals are ignorant of the psychological version of this. When a youngster needs something back, they emotionally reach out, not necessarily in words. At times, all it takes is a glance or a touch, a small change in someone's expression to convey, "I received you. You're real." However, when nothing echoes back, when the sound simply dissipates and fades into quiet, the youngster does not assume that the room is to blame. Children do not think that way. They decide that the sound was not worth reverberating. That's where it starts. We've spent decades in psychology addressing trauma as something that happens to you, something you can point to and say, that's where it occurred. A vehicle accident, an assault, or something with a distinct before and after. And this makes sense to a lot of folks. However, it has left an entire category of suffering without a name or much sympathy because, from the outside, it does not appear to be trauma. The house still stood. The parents may even be present. Nobody is going to write a memoir about the forgotten birthday or the hour they grieved in their room and no one arrived. Every time they tried to communicate something important to their mother, her eyes would shift elsewhere. Things that did not happen do not feel important. You can't properly explain them to someone without sounding theatrical, but they do leave a lasting impression, quiet and persistent. And just because they are unseen does not mean they don't exist. Psychologists refer to it as childhood emotional neglect. The reason it has been understudied for so long is due in part to how it works. It's characterized by what didn't happen, not what did. The emotional connection that never occurred. Mirroring was not present. And here's the developmental truth beneath it. Children learn to grasp their inner world in the same manner that they acquire language by having someone reflect it to them. Is it correct that a caregiver remarks, "You look sad right now," is accomplishing anything significant? They are educating the youngster that internal states exist, are nameable, and important enough to be observed. When it never happens or happens so infrequently that it goes unnoticed, the child develops into an adult who is really, and sometimes perplexingly, unable to define what they are feeling. Alexia is a clinical word indicating difficulty identifying and characterizing one's own emotional states, and studies have consistently identified a higher prevalence of it in those who experienced emotional neglect early in life. It's not a personality quirk, it's a void left by an absence. Imagine spending your entire life in a room with no echoes and then being instructed to speak up. In adulthood, this results in a profile that clinicians recognize but that people living with it find perplexing. These are frequently high-functioning individuals, competent and dependable, the type of person that everyone assumes is great because they present as such, since presenting as such was a survival strategy they learned so young that they don't even remember acquiring. Jenny Webb, the clinician who first described childhood emotional neglect, describes patients who come to her with a vague, persistent wrongness, as if everyone else has access to an emotional frequency they can't, not really despair or anxiety in the traditional sense, but more like flatness, a life lived slightly behind glass. Then there are relationships, which can be quite painful to see since the person who grew up feeling invisible struggles not only to connect with others. They frequently undermine the connection just when it begins to feel genuine. For example, when someone gives them a genuine compliment, they deflect it or laugh it off. Or perhaps someone loves them unconditionally, but it feels suffocating rather than safe. Incorrect somehow, as if you're waiting for it to be taken away, which makes perfect sense. If you grew up believing that love was unpredictable, you would have given up on it, right? So you have to adapt. You transformed into someone who doesn't need anyone and is completely self-sufficient. From the outside, that appears to be a strength, but it is actually a very old coping strategy. The desire for connection was never completely gone. Rather, it was so deeply buried that you could no longer feel it. Needs don't just disappear. They eventually quit making noise since they have realized that it does not assist. A 2024 scoping analysis published in Child Abuse and Neglect analyzed 25 independent studies and found consistent evidence that persons who were neglected as children suffer greatly with emotional management as adults. And the researchers themselves stated that emotional neglect is still one of the least studied forms of childhood misery, which speaks volumes. The wound that is most difficult to see is also the one that has received the least amount of attention. Here's what I truly want you to understand, and I'll only say it once. The way you learned to act was not a mistake, but rather a solution. A clever, extremely well-adapted answer to a situation that required you to draw back, to need and expect less. The child who went silent discovered that staying quiet kept them safe. Similarly, the kid who became the funny one discovered that making people laugh was the only consistent method to gain attention. They sometimes immersed themselves in their academics, took on caregiving responsibilities, or simply disappeared. They relied largely on the soul tools at their disposal and performed admirably. The only issue is that we do uncease utilizing a coping technique just because we no longer require it. You are no longer in that room, but your body has yet to catch up, still flinching when someone gets too close, feeling anxious when someone is truly good to you. You're still straining to understand your own emotions as if you're listening through a thick wall, but fortunately, it is not permanent. The brain is astonishingly capable of altering even after a terrible upbringing, and therapy tailored to this type of experience can have a significant impact. I'm not saying this to wrap things up nicely, since it needs more than a clean finale. Healing from this is slow because it entails grieving something unusual, the absence of things that should have been present. How do you mourn something that never occurred? How do you process a feeling that has no specific memory associated with it? It usually takes a lot of persistence and help to make it happen. However, it begins much smaller than therapy. It all begins with recognizing that your own experience is worth taking seriously. The fact that no one showed up when you needed them doesn't mean you were worth showing up for. You always were. And what that looks like daily is much less spectacular than you might imagine. You don't need this major emotional breakthrough. Start by realizing you're furious and, instead of instantly pushing it down or telling yourself you're overreacting, sit with it for a second and allow it to remain. It's finding oneself brushing off a compliment and pausing to consider why you did so. Small moments of simply paying attention to your own inner world may appear inconsequential until you consider that for some people, no one ever taught them that their inner world was worth paying attention to at all. Unfortunately, those things do not change overnight. However, when you honestly check in with yourself, something changes. And for someone who grew up feeling unheard, learning to hear themselves is pretty much the whole idea. A particular type of individual finds themselves seeing something like this, scrolling at midnight and coming across the phrase emotional neglect and feeling something shift. It's a subtle recognition. Something about it feels painfully familiar. If you are experiencing this right now, I want you to pay attention to how you feel. It's not that having a name for something magically cures it. Rather, recognition is your nervous system doing something it may never have learned to do effectively. It's reflecting something on itself. It may be faintly visible, but it exists. The sound was always worth repeating. It simply needed a different room. And if this spoke to you or put voice to something you've been thinking about for a long time, subscribing would be very appreciated. I do these deep dives on a regular basis, and there's still a lot to discover. There's also a join option on the channel if you want to directly support what I am doing. Check out my other videos on the screen. I believe you'll recognize yourself. See you there?